Hello and welcome to another episode of Contra Mundum. I am Andrew Isker, and with me is my co-host CJ Engel. Hello, CJ. How's your week?
My week was good. Thanks. I'm happier today. I told you before that this is the first time in a while that I've actually eaten before recording, so I'm juiced. I actually had 4 chicken legs, so I'm legged and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of lot of fat on there to power this episode. You know, good dark meat. So yeah, great. And you're gonna have to carry the load here today. You know, like 90% of this is gonna be you talking. So all the CJ fans out there, this is your episode because this week there was an article that was critical of a book that CJ was instrumental in bringing about, the Paleoconservatism Anthology. I think you have a copy with you, don't you?
Yeah, it's actually a Paleoconservative Anthology, and it's
yes,
published
right
by an academic press, so it's ridiculously and unfortunately expensive. But, you know, if you want to take out a second mortgage, go ahead and buy the book.
Yeah, and so we'll be discussing some of the things in this book. Apparently, this fella at lawliberty.org did take out a second mortgage to purchase the book, or maybe he got an advanced reader. I don't know.
These guys have huge grants.
Oh yeah,
they're well funded.
The think tanks got all this money. I mean, all the donors just pour money in there so they can afford a $120 book or whatever it is.
Yep.
Is it really 120?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that.
Yeah.
Stupid.
How unfortunate. But nevertheless, these guys are hypercritical of the book, and comically so. But we'll want to jump into this article a little bit here, and I think we should just go line by line and have our laughs all the way through. I think this, it's kind of a book report episode, but it's worthwhile. I think there's going to be a lot we can discuss here that can delve a lot deeper than these guys are willing to go. I mean, just in terms of, what we've talked about with Paul before, the history of the conservative movement after World War II. Mm-hmm. All these things play out in this article. So here we go. So the article is entitled "The Revanchist Revolutionaries," and I'll let CJ take it.
Well,
from
first you got to go up to the picture.
Oh yes, here we go. There he is, the man.
Yeah, they have to throw. It's so funny because, this whole article is about how paleoconservatism doesn't work, right? And that Pat Buchanan's own election efforts in the 1990s failed. But one of the most hilarious things is that Trump just completely destroyed mainstream conservative instincts about what is politically popular.
Yeah, what works. Yeah, exactly.
If anything, Pat was ahead of his time. That's kind of the role that Pat played. He was a voice in the wilderness when they were all patting themselves on the back for having this end of history approach to the role of the American empire. But now they've failed, and people are willing to relook at and reconsider Buchanan's populist strategy. And Trump is kind of the result of that. And of course, Trump did not fulfill a lot of his objectives and agendas and some of the things that he ran on. But nevertheless, I can't think of something that's more a slap in the face to articles like this than the very fact of Donald Trump in 2016.
Well, the fact that Trump won in 2016, for one, I describe, maybe I have on the show before, in other places for sure. I've described Trump as, if you took a, New York Jewish comedian and made an amalgam of him and Pat Buchanan, that would be Donald Trump, more or less. Like that's that. I mean, obviously he's nowhere near as erudite and learned as Buchanan is. But it's still the core things that drove Buchananism in the 90s were the exact same issues that were at the forefront in 2016 for Trump and in 2020 and still today. Yeah. And the bigger thing, and this goes anytime you bring up Trump, the bigger thing with Trump that people need to keep their eye on the ball with is not the man himself, but the fact that he has tens of millions, probably 30 million, I would say at least, hardcore supporters, a base that is thoroughly Buchananite. that is thoroughly repudiated Con Inc., Buckleyite conservatism.
Yeah.
That they want nothing to do with that because it has delivered nothing for them except for tax cuts for people a lot richer than them. That's all it's ever delivered, and it's destroyed the country in order to get that. So they don't care about this. They don't care about National Review, which also this National Review guy. We can maybe draw attention to this article. This guy shared. I mean, this tells you how incestuous Con Inc. is. National Review shared this article and wrote an article that was 2 or 3 paragraphs long. Oh, this article is so great, and
yeah, it's
refuses
this weird,
to elaborate.
It's this weird swooning piece about how brilliant the article was, and the article that we're going to discuss is, of course, kind of ridiculous and bizarre. But yeah, it's just funny. These guys they sit around and they pat each other on the backs. It's kind of pathetic.
Well, and because they had this, they had this victory over, guys like Paul Gottfried and Pat Buchanan, and in the 90s, and Sam Francis and men like that. They got rid of them. They purged them from the conservative movement, and they thought we're never gonna have to deal with those guys anymore. But ultimately, over a longer timeline of 20 or 30 years, it's like that Simpsons meme where Moe throws Barney out of the bar, and then here are Paleocons, behind him in the next frame. That's what's happened, and they're bigger and stronger than ever before because circumstances have dictated that. Like you said, the fruit of conservative Con Inc. failure from the 80s onward, and even earlier than that. The failure of it, it's gone full seed, right? The chickens have come home to roost with the failures of conservatism, and now people are way more by the millions interested in what Buchanan said in the 90s and Sam Francis said in the 90s than they ever had been before.
It's funny. This guy's opening paragraph is basically
let's get into it. Yeah.
Yeah, so the opening paragraph, he basically just says that people are looking for a new basis for conservative politics. Well, so what this guy's trying to say basically is that he's holding on to some historic version of conservatism, whereas there's this new trending on the horizon conservatism that's seeking to replace his traditional conservatism.
Yeah, this is the way it's always been.
The truth is completely opposite. The truth is completely opposite.
Yeah, it's a lie.
Yeah, the conservative movement that this guy represents is actually an artificial development that happened in the 80s from people that came over from Trotskyism, right?
Legit commies. Yeah.
Politically strategic and strategically brilliant, they basically swept through the conservative movement and took it over in the 70s and 80s. And it was the paleoconservatives who were opposing this trend, and they sought to return to a much older tradition of American political life. And so the idea that this is how conservatives like mainstream conservatives like to do it. They like to pretend like they have this apostolic succession going back to Edmund Burke, and it's just kind of goofy and loony because. And we'll get into this, but he tries to incorporate people like Russell Kirk into his own vision of things. Russell Kirk was an agrarian. Russell Kirk was anti-vehicle. Russell Kirk is way more of a paleoconservative. That's one of the funniest things. This book, this author is going to basically critique this book for being an echo of Sam Francis. But I'm looking at the chapters here, and I've read the whole thing, and I've contributed an essay. There's only one essay on Sam Francis.
Yeah.
Right. And it's by Pedro Gonzalez, of course, but he contributed the only article about Francis. The rest of them have to do with jurisprudence, foreign policy, the nature of the Old South, the nature of anthropological questions about human nature. How should a conservative practice the art of history? The whole thing is this wide-ranging, broad approach to introducing people to paleoconservatism. And of course, this guy probably just opens the index, looks for Sam Francis's name, and then says, "Aha! This book is racist." It's
they're racist and white nationalists. And it's funny,
it's why can't you come up with something new? I know, yeah, isn't that funny?
But yeah, he's white adjacent, so he's
what's the phrase that people use to describe Pedro? He's I don't know, he's like a Latino fascist or whatever.
Latinx white nationalist, apparently.
Yeah, it's funny.
Latinx. I know, man. It's so absurd and ridiculous, and that's what they do, though. People need to understand that movement conservatism, Con Inc., is the interloper. They're the ones that hollowed out conservatism after World War II, and wore it as a skin suit into the 80s and 90s. And what we were brought up on, as young, as children and even young men, in the Clinton years and the Bush years and the Obama years, all of that was fake. All of that was this weird amalgam of aspects of Trotsky, Trotskyite, chastened Trotskyites that took it over, these neocons. I mean, it is so ridiculous for these people to say, yeah, Russell Kirk, we have this intellectual genealogy going back to Russell Kirk. What a joke. Give me a break. So no, that's not the way to, like, if you've never, if you don't know anything about paleoconservatism whatsoever, that's what you need to know, is like just the name itself is drawing upon these older traditions. I mean, our friend of the show, Stephen Wolf, he had a couple tweets that got under the, were a bee under the bonnet of many of these type of people this week. And one of them is like these people were calling him a Nazi and a racist and a fascist and all these things because like David Bahnsen, who's very much a movement conservative type guy, is calling him a Nazi, things like that, or implying it. And Wolf's entire thing is, no, I just am a pre-World War II conservative.
Yep.
That's what I am. But anything that is not post-war conservatism
is Nazism.
These people is fascism, is Nazism. And
there's such it's hilarious. Like, apparently Nazism has been like the modus operandi for 1,500 years of the Christian West. It's like, it's such a ridiculous,
I know,
such a ridiculous claim. So
let's continue on here.
Otherwise
this is going to be a 4-hour episode, which maybe the people want. Maybe they want more.
The people want 4 hours of me. I would fall asleep. I wouldn't make it.
You need more chicken legs.
I need more chicken legs. And I need more gum. Did you get your gum, by the way?
Did you actually send it?
No.
Rats.
I was gonna do the thing where I was like, oh, they haven't delivered it yet. Like, I'm pissed. I'm gonna call them. I'll call the tracking number.
Great. Yeah. Oh, all right. Let's continue.
Can't depend on the postal office. Okay.
No, that bureaucracy.
Yeah. So first of all, there's nothing conservative about. I'm down in the what paragraph am I in? Third paragraph. There's nothing conservative about today's paleoconservatism, with its emphasis on class warfare, racial grievance, and power politics. It's an ideology better understood as a right-wing form of Marxism. I think that's kind of like the thrust of what he wants to argue here. It's basically like a right-wing.
Where is this?
Marxism.
I need to bring it up on the screen. Where are we?
You're on the screen. Third paragraph, starting with unfortunately.
I can't count. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things about paleoconservatism is it emphasizes particularity of situation, and so this is actually an ironic critique here, because in the 1950s, all hope of like abandoning the American order, everyone led by Buckley was ready to abandon traditional constitutionalism because nothing was more important on opposing the communists. So they had to abandon conservatism. They had to abandon the American order. They had to abandon all the traditional institutions in order to defeat communism. Right? That was kind of like their claim. So they had this argument basically that we needed to respond to special trends in the world with political power in order to, stand up for the American way. But now, given the dynamics of the new left and the left that confronts us today, paleoconservatives are recognizing the fact that we need to confront them, given that it's a unique situation, and we need to, bring up things like power politics, because that is how the left has characterized its own strategy. But now we're not allowed to do that anymore, because what we're doing is we're calling out the bluff of the neoconservatives. Yeah. Right. So it is true that there are aspects of paleoconservatism, not in the 80s and 90s for sure, but right now there are aspects of the paleoconservative faction that see a post-constitutional order as already having come about. We already live in a post-constitutional order. We don't get to pretend like we can preserve the Constitution and preserve the traditional way of life. We do live in a state of emergency. And this is just ironic because, paleoconservatives are beginning to recognize that we have to use things like power to confront the left. But now, of course, when the left is using these, strategies, now we're not allowed to take action at all. I mean, that's really been the way that neoconservatives, since their adoption of power, have treated those on the outside. Is you're not allowed to respond in an emergency way to the situation because they're cozy at the top, basically.
Yeah, they don't have any reason to oppose these things. That's ultimately what it comes down to. They don't care.
Yeah,
they don't care about fighting the new left, the woke left. They would, because and they'll claim these shibboleths about our values and our constitutional order and all these things, and it's so comical.
It's also interesting too, like, because the left is so characterized by an anti-white ideology, the idea that we can't defend ourselves unless, like the idea that anytime we mention the fact that actually we can be proud of our heritage and actually we don't have to be ashamed of our European roots. Anytime we bring up something like that, it's called racial grievance.
Yeah,
right. That's what it's called, is racial grievance. So,
they're allergic to it. They can't. They can't allow. I mean, that's why they freak out about things that Sam Francis wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't because he wrote these things that are just morally wrong. It's that they're embarrassed by that,
right.
because that the left is so vitriolic against white people, against people of European heritage, that they're afraid to do that. They're terrified of doing that. That's ultimately what it is. It is. It's an ideology. It's the ideology cloak of cowardice.
Yeah,
that's how you need to understand what movement conservatism is. It's the pretense of fighting, by cowards. That's. I mean, if that's in the back of your head the entire time. I mean, you think about National Review, or you think about whatever this lawliberty.org is. These men are cowards, Donnie. You have nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, and then he gets into specific. He introduces his article, and then he gets specific. So, 20th century conservatives, such as Russell Kirk and William F. Buckley, built their movement on the idea of the American founding.
I love that he groups those two together as though they're synonymous.
Russell Kirk was definitely not as much of like a Gottfriedian like right winger for sure, but but in terms of like opposition to the neoconservatives, like, Kirk was there. Kirk was a Buchanan supporter. Not only was Kirk a Buchanan supporter, but he was a supporter of Mel Bradford against the neoconservatives in the famous early 1990s war for positioning within the Reagan administration. Like, Russell Kirk, who founded Modern Age, was absolutely a paleoconservative in a broad sense. Or I could say he was an anti-neoconservative. He was a traditionalist founding American. And the whole point of paleoconservatism was actually to defend and protect the idea of the American founding, not to oppose it. It was the neoconservatives that they were blaming on reconstructing the American way in a post-civil rights, post-war, propositional nationhood sense. So the neoconservatives were redefining what it meant to be an American, and Russell Kirk was part of the group, including Paul Gottfried, the editor of this book, and including all of the other paleoconservatives, including the paleo-libertarians, and that's going to be important in a minute. But they were the ones defending the original American founding. They were the ones that were blaming the neoconservatives and the conservative movement for opposing the constitutional order. They were the ones that were rejecting the New Deal revolution. They were the ones that were trying to get us back to the, pre-managerial revolution timeframe. But all of these neoconservatives, they were completely fine with what FDR did. They were completely fine with the New Deal, with the warfare state, all the things that the
Civil Rights
paleoconservatives
Act
opposed.
Yeah.
It was the paleoconservatives who were staunchly opposed to constitutional creativity.
Yeah. I mean, that you see the second line here in this paragraph. For them, conservative politics needed to be rooted in a reverential devotion to the Constitution, a healthy appreciation for the free market. And a vigorous anti-communism. And as Ronald Reagan's stunning electoral successes proved, these ideas were immensely popular. One thing that should be noted right there when we think about the 1980s is Reagan was given this massive mandate. It's true. He was incredibly popular. There was this
And
conservative revolution.
What
did they accomplish?
Well, that, but also what paleoconservative opposed them? They were all on Reagan's side. Buchanan was a Reaganite at that time. So, what he's doing is he's just like selecting key like rhetoric that he can just like dance around and like hold up, for like signaling and symbolizing like his, that he's taking the right view of things.
These are shibboleths.
The other hilarious thing here is that why did Irving Kristol was like probably like the godfather of like neoconservative ideology. Mm-hmm. He was the one that was saying we can't idolize the free market. He was the one saying that we can only have two cheers for capitalism. Yeah. But it was the libertarians and their absolute free markets, which is different than the paleoconservatives, right? The paleo-libertarians were much more of like an absolute free market. But why did they all oppose the neoconservatives? And why did they side with the paleocons? Like his whole paradigm makes no sense. Like the healthy appreciation for the free market, they were the ones that were endorsing the managerial state, the administrative state, like managed capitalism.
And they were perfectly fine. One of the things is like here, I look at the 1980s in practical political terms as this, last gasp of life of Heritage America, where they elect this cowboy actor to be their president and try to restore things. And they could have fought back against the new Constitution of 1964 and undone the Civil Rights Act with the mandate that they had, or at least started to roll it back. And instead, they did the opposite. They everything that they did was in line with it. They didn't oppose those things whatsoever. They're perfectly fine with it.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that the neoconservatives had a reverential devotion to the Constitution, it's just kind of like it's straight out of the loony bin. I mean, it was the paleoconservative. It was Russell Kirk and it was Mel Bradford and it was all the other paleoconservatives that were pointing out again and again that every aspect of the administrative state in the 20th century was unconstitutional.
Yeah. The neoconservatives and the movement conservatives, they're perfectly fine with all. They're not just perfectly fine. They wanted to increase the power of the federal government, increase the power of the administrative state.
That was Buckley's whole thing.
We needed to fight the commies, and we need to fight the Soviet Union. And
Russell Kirk did have a problem with that. Russell Kirk is not on this guy's side. Bill Buckley is. Like, it's fair to cite Bill Buckley for sure, but not Russell Kirk.
No, not at all. So the next paragraph, go ahead with.
Okay, let's see. So paleoconservatives sneered at this approach. Yeah, whatever. We just discussed that and desired something more radical. More radically what? More radically what?
Yeah.
More radically constitutional, as it turns out.
Yeah.
The main thrust of Kirk's conservatism was to assure Americans that it was really okay. The society which they lived government dominated. So basically he's trying to juxtapose Francis and Kirk. And like I said earlier, Kirk was definitely. So how I would characterize Sam Francis is he's someone who did become much more radically right-wing than self-consciously constitutionalist. While Kirk didn't go as far as Sam Francis did, Sam Francis was recognizing that we actually already lived in a post-constitutional order, and we needed to have a decision maker that would basically recognize these conflicts and confront them politically. Kirk didn't venture down that path, but the idea that Kirk was somehow therefore automatically on the non-paleoconservative side, I think is rewriting history a little bit. And this is one of the points that I've been trying to make in this this book. This book is not about Sam Francis. There's one essay on the contributions of Sam Francis, and of course, Sam Francis was a follower of Burnham, who himself was also like he was a neoconservative in some sense. Burnham was like a neoconservative, and Francis was influenced by him for sure. So the point of this is that there is a lot of variety in paleoconservatism. There's a lot of camps that have like significant conflicts, and it's not like this racialist group or something ridiculous like that.
Or even monolithic in that way. No, exactly. I mean, this line here is, protecting the Constitution and defeating the Soviet Union were not enough for Francis. Well, one, these people didn't want to protect the Constitution, like you were saying. The Constitution was over at that point in Francis's mind, and Buckley is one of the guys who helped kill it.
Exactly right.
And so, no, it's not enough. And look at what happened. What victories did we get in the 1980s that we can look back to today and say, boy, I'm glad that happened, right? What, at least domestically, right? I mean, obviously the Soviet Union falling, people would be like, what about the Soviet Union? But domestically, all of the social and cultural and political changes that occurred after World War II to our country, none of that was affected whatsoever. And in fact, it only got worse because of Reagan. Right? That's what people need to realize. Like the right idolizing Ronald. I mean, it's so funny because you see this with like the appeals. You used to see it a lot when we were, during the Bush years and even the Obama years, is they always give these like odes to Ronald Reagan when they're candidates for president or Republican candidates for president. Oh, I'm a Reaganite. That's not so common anymore. You see it a little bit with Trump and posted pictures of him with Reagan, but not anymore. The boomers are dying off.
You've read Caldwell's book, right? The Age of Entitlement.
Yeah.
I mean, he makes a really good case that Reagan was the product of the liberal age, of like the post-war liberals. He was the guy that sought to use to manipulate the way government did policy in order to help people reach all of their material interests, their consumer interests. And during his time, the growth of the government was astronomical. I mean, the debt exploded, the administrative state became more powerful, and things that have begun to come undone in the 21st century were bolstered by Reagan.
Yeah, the security state that right now is trying to put Donald Trump in prison for the rest of his earthly existence was bolstered by Ronald Reagan. Like, that's the things, the enemies that we have that occupy our country at the highest levels were further entrenched in the 1980s.
Yeah, because of him. Reagan, there were aspects of his presidency and candidacy that echoed some of the concerns of values conservatives, but all in all, his administration pursued a liberal intervention, like internationalist policy. Yeah, he's an internationalist.
The globalist American empire began. We could say it had its beginning, of course, in the Second World War, but it came into full bloom in the 1980s. One, because the Soviet Union collapses, and they have ultimate victory in the Cold War. But this thing that is currently destroying Europe, is currently destroying the United States. This regime was built up in the 1980s. It was built up by the movement conservatives because they thought they were defending the Constitution. They weren't. They weren't defending anything. They weren't standing athwart history yelling stop. They were cheering it on.
Yeah.
That's what these people need to understand. They're capable of understanding this because it's such a fantastical joke. Of a worldview that these people have and a view of history. It's just lies. It's not true. So we'll continue on. He quotes David Azarad, who, I don't think he does a lot of podcasts, but it'd be great if we had him someday. But I'll read this one. The latter-day paleoconservatives who contributed to the anthology agree with Francis. Of course, he always wants to pin everybody to Francis. Oh man. The ideas of Kirk and Hayek, appealing as they were to Bill Buckley, were always too disconnected from the concerns of the base. David Azarad writes in the second essay of the collection. Conservatism was, and largely remains, an ideology in search of a mass constituency. He believes that the mass appeal can be found in the Buchananite three-legged stool of economic protectionism, immigration, restrictionism, and isolationism. Yes, that is historical American conservatism from the beginning of the Constitutional Republic until World War II. That is American history. That's what it was, is economic protectionism, immigration restrictionism, and isolation. That's what it was. If you just, people are totally ignorant of just on immigration alone, the immigration policy of the United States for most of its history was we're hardly letting any people in. If we do, they're going to be people from Europe that are culturally similar to us. That was it. That was it.
And isolationism, there's absolutely a strong tradition in the American political life that emphasize the fact that we aren't going to get bogged down in European allyships. We're not going to tie ourselves to the interests of various European countries. Like, that is a very strong aspect of American foreign policy up until the progressive era. So of course this guy is going to echo the priorities and instincts of progressive America and call
Woodrow Wilson was awesome according to these guys.
Of course, that's their view. Like, that's the neoconservative view, that Wilson and FDR and all of these like administrative state developers, they are the ideal. If you look at like a neoconservative list of their favorite presidents, FDR is high up there. They just don't like LBJ. They just don't like the newest renditions of it. Of course, now LBJ is fine, and
they probably like him
Biden
now.
is bad, but exactly. That's just how conservatism works. But the paleoconservatives, they were the ones that were saying that, no, we need to proceed. We need to find our moment even before FDR and the managerial state.
Yeah. Well, let's read this next the next section. The new three-legged stool. No, it's the old one. It's the original basis of America. Let's read on though. Go ahead, CJ.
So the new three-legged stool is wildly opposed to the original Reaganite, right? Reagan's the original. Yeah, whatever. For free markets, for social conservatism. It's so funny because these guys were all social liberals, and these are the same guys now that are saying that gay rights is a family value now. That's the newest thing.
Sorry, we got to protect kids from being trans by upholding gay marriage.
And of course, all of them opposed the libertarians who were arguing for free markets. All of them opposed, like they were, I remember there was a coalition of libertarians who were pro-free market and Buchananites who were anti-free market, but both of them were against managed international markets, right? Like NAFTA.
What these guys think of as free markets is the Federal Reserve manipulating the monetary supply, unlimited credit, and Wall Street getting filthy rich by importing, tens of millions of foreign laborers. Like, that's free markets to them. Yeah. It's not, you having the freedom to open up a business and exchange goods freely and bolstering, free enterprise in the truest sense. They don't care about that at all. They care about ginormal corporations getting big tax breaks, getting cheap credit, and making lots and lots of money. The GDP going up, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they care about. They don't care about the actual basis of the country in the sense of regular people being able to have economic success from their own hard work. And entrepreneurship.
They care about the interests of Walmart and Microsoft and all of that.
Yeah, they don't care about the mom and pop store. They don't care about the small business owner. They don't care about any of that stuff. That's the free market in Reaganite neocon terms.
It's actually not even a free market. Of course, it's a managed government market.
It's the Paul Ryan, George W. Bush. We got to save, violate free market principles to save the free market. Like, that's their whole shtick.
Yeah,
it's fake.
It's also funny that he says here that he doesn't talk about the fact that Reagan was the guy behind California's liberalization of abortion laws.
Yeah, and divorce laws and everything. Like all of these.
Is that part of the three-legged stool?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I know. The first divorced president ever too. Like that is that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, imagine
social
calling
conservatism.
like Hollywood politics, the basis of your conservatism. It's kind of goofy.
Yeah, it totally is.
And then of course the last one that he lists there is the strong foreign policy, which all that means is like militarism around the world. That's what that means.
Yeah, that needs to be fleshed out a little bit too. Like, it's not strong isolationism, so-called, is strong foreign policy. It's defending the country, the national interest.
If you look at like the famous speeches of like Charles Lindbergh and the other America Firsters, like in the 1920s and early 30s, all of what they called isolationism was just the ability of America to have a strong military for defense purposes, not to go around parading, democratic expansionism.
Yeah, to defend ourselves, not to bring liberal democracy to the planet.
Right.
That's what when these guys talk about strong foreign policy, it means empire.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they mean. A globalist American empire.
Which,
That's
of course, as like good. Ron Paul has stated again and again, actually weakens our defense, self-defense.
Yeah, it's a weak foreign policy. Ultimately, I mean, look at the trillions of dollars that have been spent just in the last 20 years. Strong foreign policy. Give me a break. All right, so let's continue on your the next. Keep going, CJ.
Let's see. The Paleoconservatives are open about their rejection of conservative orthodoxy.
Orthodoxy.
Right. What we're opposed to, what we're open about, is our rejection of post-war consensus orthodoxy. That's what we're opposed, to. I would put up like the conservative and traditionalist. Like we are way more traditionalist and conservative and constitutional, especially in the 1990s, than the neoconservatives were. And
absolutely.
Karl Horowitz is completely right to say that the Reagan years were revolutionary and out of whack with reality.
Yes.
So yes,
like history has borne that out. Like, I mean, just look at it.
But it's funny how it's funny how he doesn't have any pushback for Horowitz's claim. Right. Yeah. He says, so, Horowitz basically is arguing that Reagan's conservatism did nothing to prevent a far left takeover. Look at where we're living.
It didn't.
It's like it didn't. It didn't.
How can you not see this?
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. He says that America is now a nation where radical ideology is the coin of the realm of higher education, mass media, and philanthropy. Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, Karl Horowitz is right. I mean,
what world are you living in, Michael Lucchese?
Well, he doesn't have an argument against it, so
it's just an assertion. Like, look how dumb these guys are. They think Ronald Reagan failed.
Exactly. Yeah, and this acute sense of loss leaves paleoconservatives feeling desperate. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, we're in desperate straits. Is that? Yeah. I don't know why that should be controversial. I mean, the idea that we're not in desperate straits kind of makes you out to be complicit with like liberalization and and the left.
At the very best, you seem aloof and really stupid.
If you look at the transsexual phenomenon and the like ideology of transing our children, and you don't feel like we're in desperate straits, I don't know. I don't. You're not an ally of mine. That's for sure.
Man, they're chopping the genitals off little kids, and you're like, oh well, they're just desperate.
Yeah. And as such, since we see things that way, paleoconservatives are open to adopting the tactics and even the principles of their far left enemies. First of all, I'm not adopting the principles of my far left enemies. No. I'm at every level, I'm opposing every single one of their principles confrontationally, tactically, and politically. That's my answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, explain that, buddy. Like what principles are we adopting of theirs?
Yeah,
precisely. Like they just say things that are flat out lies.
Yeah,
I abhor everything from the left. I despise it. Every principle that these people have. People turn this into, hopefully you don't do this because, alcoholism and drunkenness is bad. But please do not every time I say, give me a break in this episode into a drinking game, because you could, and it would kill you. So don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah. But the next paragraph, next section, Sam Francis and right-wing Marxism. I'll read this paragraph here. Samuel Francis was one of Buchanan's closest advisors, but in the wider conservative movement, he was seen as a fringe thinker. In the 90s, Francis was even ostracized for his racism. He argued, for instance, that neither racism nor slavery as an institution is a sin.
Go ahead. Comment on that. Like, first of all, he was ostracized for his racism. Yes, all the true conservatives were ostracized from consensus conservatism. Yeah. Like there's a great book of essays called The Great Purge, and this has kind of been like the mode of operation for conservatism since Buckley. Buckley was the original cancel culture guy in the conservative movement. So yes, we know that we've been ostracized for saying racism. This is how left wingers argue. This is how liberal minds talk about things, and they bring
talk about adopting, like, go back to the previous paragraph, adopting the tactics and even the principles of their far left enemies.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about that. Like that's like two sentences before. Adopting the principles and tactics of their far left enemies.
The far left
What
enemies.
are they doing? Like, what are they doing here?
Exactly.
They're doing exactly what the left does. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the term racism, I mean, going back to Trotsky, that's who invented it.
Mm-hmm.
That's who came up with the term racism. Is it isn't, you know, it isn't something that you go all the way back to the Bible and, you know, racism is a sin. And so, you know, the context of you know, what Francis argued, that racism, you know, isn't you know, so called, is not something. There's no Bible verse that says, you know, thou shalt not be racist, using this Trotskyite left wing term to describe all manner of things. I mean, Paul. When we had Paul on, and he talked about these things, is that the anti-fascism ethos of post-war everything, leftism and conservative, you know, movement conservatism, is calling everything that is normal and decent and maintains the order of civilization, family, all these things, calling it fascist. And so they do the same thing with racist, right? That's what these people do. And so, you know, Francis is arguing against that. Not and as far as slavery goes, I mean, it's we could have a whole episode just on discussing slavery, but like, there's slavery in the Bible that is condoned by God. So I mean, we could talk about chattel slavery and the American experience and everything wrong with it, the problems with it, and so forth, and why it was bad, and
it's also
all of that. But
it's also much more consistent with the historical classical European view of slavery to consider it not a sin, like by itself. It can have definitely have sinful elements, for sure, but the Bible nowhere does call slavery an actual sin. In fact, the several times that it had an opportunity to do so, it urges both the slave and the master to be honorable to each other.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest embarrassment for, and this I think is going to continue to be a problem into the future for these weak-willed evangelicals, you know, the you know, big Eva types and so forth, is that there is an entire epistle by the Apostle Paul where he's returning a slave to his master and say, hey, take care of this guy, treat him as a brother, and all the instructions of slaves to obey their masters. Like, it's a huge embarrassment to modern Christians, and they try to weasel out of it and things like that. But it's not easy to do, because it's the Bible, you know, deals with the world as God created it, and that there are hierarchies. And even today, I mean, we don't have institutional slavery at all, but we you know, at least nominally, in name. But we still have these castes and classes where we have an underclass. I mean, going back to immigration, I mean, why do they want this mass migration from the third world? So they can have this, you know, basically a helot class of laborers, to mow people's lawns and roof their houses and things like that. Like, and pick all the vegetables. Like, that's why they want them. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, like, Ron DeSantis is not able to deal with immigration very effectively, as strongly as he's dealt with so many other things in Florida, is because the agricultural lobbyists in Florida are incredibly powerful. And they don't want to have, like, you know, E-Verify and things like this, requirements that would root out illegals from the labor force in Florida, because they want to have this helot class. So do we have slave? Yeah, they're free to, you know, come and go as they please. They're not owned by a person, but it's an entire class of slaves that we have. So these things are, in sociological terms, you know, unavoidable. We just give them different names.
Of course.
So it's so silly.
This is one of the arguments. Like, it's hard to see it from their perspectives, but this is one of the arguments of, like, that the South made during the North and South wars. Like, they had this very patrimonial approach to slavery, where they couldn't imagine the idea of, like, because the slave lived on their property, the master was responsible for them being taken care of and being well fed. Of course, there's abuse there for sure, but the masters and a lot of the apologists for the South were arguing that, like, it doesn't seem to them as an improvement to just abandon them, to give them a wage job where they don't have to take care of their food and their housing and all these things. Like, this is one of the critiques of, like, industrial society by the agrarian South. Like, say whatever you want about them, but like Eugene Genovese has done a ton of work on the nature of the patrimonial society in the South, and he really critiqued wage labor along these exact concerns. And I don't want to get
former, Marxist. I mean, we could do a whole episode on analysis of American slavery and all of it. I mean, right now too, like, you have people that want to relitigate the Civil War and treat, and they want to treat slavery as, America's, great sin, and that gives them license to hate white people. Whether you're even here before slavery was, even if your ancestors came here after slavery was abolished, you're still complicit somehow. But it's all of it is, Francis is trying to deal with American history honestly, and not in this quasi Marxist way. Actually, like that's how you have to look at it. Where this looks like this horrible damning quote where he is this bad guy saying slavery is not that bad, and it's like, no, stealing people from Africa is bad. Like, man stealing is a sin. But this institution as it existed, it was incredibly difficult to deal with in our history. It was a huge problem. We fought a massive civil war over it. Like and these guys do treat it like this, like it's a Marvel comic book. They're just pathetic. I think. And so anyway, going back, well, we could beat this to death, but maybe another time. Despite these noxious views, however, Francis is undergoing a renaissance of popularity in certain corners of the right, including among the contributors to A Paleoconservative Anthology.
I think one of the reasons for that renaissance is because everything he's predicted in the 90s has gone completely true. Yeah. He was saying before anybody that the civil rights mentality of the American regime was actually going to transform into an anti-white perspective, and he called for whites to rally together. I mean, like, okay, you don't have to like
view to these people. Yeah,
you don't have to like Francis, but like, he was completely correct that this thing was going to turn into an anti-white mentality. And the author of this article is living in a complete bubble if he doesn't recognize the fact that Francis should be seen as a prophet in this way, in this area.
He's been vindicated for sure.
So
though through his ideological writings, Francis tried to create a right-wing Leninism.
It's ironic. I
know. Lenin believed that a Bolshevik vanguard would free the Russian proletariat from the Tsarist ruling class. In a similar way, Francis believed the right should become the vanguard of an American proletarian movement. So, I mean, we could just pause for a second to talk about Vanguardism.
Yeah.
Lenin was correct and was politically effective in this way. There isn't anything Marxian about an idea that you have a small cadre of people, intellectually driving a particular movement. That is the way politics is done in general. That's how you bring about political change. And he understood that there is this large, white working class, this underclass of people who are being dispossessed in their own country, that are unhappy with it, and they need to be mobilized and activated. And organized. And that's, how do you do that? Well, you have to have a group of people, of leaders, banding together to organize them. I mean, this is the thing. Like, you could take, going back to they're adopting these Marxian principles. It's like, no, like, Vanguardism is not exclusively a Marxian thing. It is, it's basic political activity and organizing. It's like reading. You could read, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals and understand, how leftist activism and organizing works, and get insights out of that without adopting their principles. That's there's nothing wrong with that. What are you supposed to do? Like, if you have an enemy, like, in just terms of like fighting a war, and you have an enemy that has an effective tactic, right, and they're just picking you off and eating your lunch, should you say, well, we can't adopt that tactic because they're bad people? It's like, no, they're doing something that works, and there's nothing morally wrong with a vanguard. right? What like that's
yeah.
Is there anything morally wrong with this? What's morally wrong with saying we should have a vanguard that activates the this dispossessed class, this hated class in our country? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just this assertion that, well, it came from Marx, so it must be bad, or it came from Lenin, it must be bad and wrong. No, Francis was right, and that's I mean, that's what Trump and MAGA and all these things have sort of done, and especially the online right. The online right is that vanguard, right? It is that vanguard of ideas, this incubator of ideas and energy within the broader, MAGA movement of tens of millions of people that are driving things. I mean, you see these ideas start to circulate upward and broaden out, where you see like Elon Musk tweeting out things about demographic replacement and so forth. Like
there's this speech by Stephen Carson, who's a friend of Nima Parvini's. The OG Roland Rat or whatever. Yeah. So there's one of his friends he's a Christian, and he basically wrote that like Christendom was created at the fall of Rome by a vanguard of people that kind of kept it alive while Rome was in complete turmoil.
Yeah, Stephen's a good guy. We should have him on too.
Yeah, that was complete vanguardism.
We could, maybe next week, if no big news happens, we should have Steven on. We're doing an on-air production meeting here. We'll see if we get. I'll message him and see if we can get him on to talk about Vanguardism. Just because I think it's worthwhile.
His entire point is that Christendom is a product of Vanguardism.
Well, even if you look at the New Testament, what are these tiny little churches that eventually conquered Rome? What are they? What were the apostles? These are vanguards of a movement.
Yeah.
If we think about it in these terms.
Right. So who's adopting language? Who's the conservative now? I mean, we're looking.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. I'm the captain now. So the last sentence here, he said the right should enhance the polarization of Middle American, the Francis term Middle American radicals, enhance the polarization of Middle Americans from the incumbent regime and mobilize them in radical opposition to the regime. Oh no, anything but that.
Right,
you can't have that happen.
Of course not, because that would threaten the regime, and these guys care more about the regime than anything else.
They love the regime, right? Yeah. They love the regime. They love that we right now are trying to fight for freedom to have trans kids in Ukraine, right? That's what they love.
Yeah,
they want global transification of the planet.
Yeah, the idea that situation doesn't call for regime change is kind of it's just beyond even a rational conversation.
Let's just keep the regime in power. Oh yeah, great, awesome. Then this big quote, the big one, right-wing Marxism is an ideology of despair. Far from saving a republic they claim is already dead. Okay, buddy, it is dead. These ideologues would simply inflame the partisan tensions which endanger it. Like, what world is this guy living in? Like, how much of a bubble do you have to be in to not see that? Yes, the republic is dead. It is gone. It is not coming back.
Yeah,
right? It is cold on the table, and the partisan tensions that it's already dead. So you're endangering a corpse. The partisan tensions are the only thing that is going to carry civilization forward into whatever is next, right? We need the partisan tensions because the only other option is surrender and allowing the left to completely dominate everything, right? That's the option, right? In this guy's world, right? Yeah. This staffer of Ben Sass, right? Is, if we just are respectable and we just let things happen, we'll get back to a constitutional republic if we're just moderate and under control. We don't inflame partisan tensions. We can't do that. That would be very bad. This is insane. I mean, really, when you step back to think about what these people actually believe, this is nuts. Like they do not live in reality at all. But I'm fired up. I better calm down and stop inflaming my partisan tensions. Well, read the next paragraph, CJ.
Yeah, no, I want to comment on the right-wing Marxism thing. This is something that, just out of fidelity to Paul Gottfried, he's a historian of European ideas.
Yeah.
And he's made the point again and again that it can't just be seen as like Marxism versus like conservatism or whatever.
Yeah.
But these things are very complicated, and Marxism shared with traditionalism in opposition to liberalism. Right? There's a lot of things going on here, and like so just because we're anti-liberal, we don't take up a liberal paradigm. These people think that implies Marxism. Well, what it does is it implies an anti-liberalism, and there are aspects of Marxist thought that opposed liberalism along similar lines to how a traditionalist conservative would argue. So it's correct to say that we're right wing for sure, and it's also correct to say that we're anti-liberal, whereas these people are pro-liberal.
Yeah, they simply assume that liberalism is the be all and the end all, that is the baseline of correct conservative thought, and it's not. It simply is not. You're right.
Yeah. So anyway, so Paul borrows things from so Robert Nisbet, who's one of the most important conservative thinkers in American 20th century thought. He's taken aspects of Marxist sociology and applied them to a conservative mentality, and so. Just on the basis that it's anti-liberal. I mean, but these guys are individualist liberals, and so therefore they call everyone who opposes them Marxists.
I mean, it's just like James Lindsay. I mean, that clown.
Exactly.
It's so silly and stupid. But yeah, let's continue on. Otherwise, this might be a 4-hour episode. I don't know.
Are we halfway through the article? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Gottfried himself writes in the introduction to the anthology, Francis felt no reservations about taking ideas from Marxist sources, if they explain social developments he was studying at the time. He states that he has, like Francis, abandoned the anti-Marxist tropes of Cold War conservatism and have become more critical of woke capitalists and conservatives who accommodate the cultural left. What this sounds to me is that Paul's like too conservative for him. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I know. What are you supposed to say? Like, buddy, the Cold War is over. We're in a different situation today.
Oh, and he says paleoconservatives want to fight fire with fire.
Yeah.
As opposed to this guy who wants to fight it with squirt guns.
Yeah, no, he wants to fight fire by taking a nap. That's what he wants. I mean, they don't want to fight.
Or they want to stand athwart the fire and yell stop. That's what they want to do. Yeah.
That might be the title of the episode.
Standing athwart fire, yelling stop. That's so true.
What aspect of Francis's right-wing Marxism? I shudder at even repeating that line. It's so ridiculous and pompous. Rarely, Francis' right-wing Marxism, rarely cited by his latter-day fans, is its explicit racism. He believed the elite allied with an underclass of racial minorities to subvert the social, cultural, and national identity of white Americans. He even deployed the Marxist concept of false consciousness to denigrate those who do not buy into this new kind of grievance-driven politics. So let's stop right there.
Brilliant. This makes Francis sound pretty based.
He's absolutely right, too. What do you think has happened? Like, did you not live through 2020 and watch the elite take all of these minority groups and animate their hatred of white people to destroy the social, cultural, and national identity? They're pulling down statues of like not just Confederate soldiers, but like Christopher Columbus and American Revolutionary War heroes.
Churchill, these are like the gods of the 20th century liberalism.
And they turned drag queens and trans stuff into something at the very center of the culture now. And they've what do you think happened in 2020, man? What do you think was going on? You think the elite isn't allied with race Marxists pushing these things? Of course they are.
Yeah.
Like, how do you not see that? I mean, like this line here, because he's explicit racism. Like you read this line, you think about the Summer of George in 2020, and that's what happened. That's literally what took place in 2020 with BLM and the mostly peaceful riots. They did precisely that.
Yeah.
Right. What else happened there? You think, oh, there was just racial justice, man. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, and like, let me step back up to the paragraph above it too. Like, so he's getting mad because we're abandoning the anti-Marxist tropes of Cold War conservatism, and we become more critical of woke capitalism. Who's our current threat right now?
Yeah.
Right now, is it Jeff Bezos and the technocrats, or is it some like Marxist ideologue in Paris? Like, where's the enemy? This is the thing about paleoconservatism, is they're always looking for the real enemies.
Who is our enemy today? Yeah,
exactly. That's paleoconservatism. And so yes, of course, Marxism died. Like Marxism fell apart with the Soviet Union. It completely failed.
We are in the month of June, and this year has been a little bit different. They're trying to dial back the wokeness a little bit, but in the month of June, every single Fortune 500 company turns their logo into a rainbow. And come on, what do you think who is the enemy, man?
Yeah, they're not trying to collectivize the means of production. They're trying to train your kids.
I know, it is so silly. Let's you read this next one in his contribution.
In his contribution to the essay collection, Pedro Gonzalez, the Latino Pedro Gonzalez, calls Francis's Middle American radicals a social base for counter-revolution. All this guy's doing. I've read this article several times, but all he's doing is like a crash course into how amazing Francis was and how perceptive he was.
I know.
So yes,
I know.
Okay, a social base for counter-revolution. These guys can't.
And it is.
These guys, they hate counter-revolution more than the revolution for sure.
Yeah.
So as opposed to more genteel conservatives. Okay. Gonzalez says this reactionary movement is not opposed to exercising political power for its own advantage. Okay, yes, this is one of the worst grievances that Conservative Inc. has with paleoconservatism is they're actually willing to oppose the left.
You might use political power to fight the left.
It's like that meme, like two guys tied up, and they're like, "Well, at least we
the Stone Toss
principles."
Cartoon,
and then it pulls out, there's a gun to your head. It's like, well, congratulations, you're about to die.
Yeah, exactly. It's so ridiculous. It's so silly. Like, think of this as opposed to more genteel conservatives. We would use a different word that starts with a C about these conservatives. Gonzalez says this reactionary movement is not opposed to using political power for its own advantage. Oh no. They want to anytime these guys generally they like DeSantis because he is an opponent of Trump. They like him to that extent. But when they freak out about DeSantis, it's that he's using political power against our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't like that. Oh no, that's bad. David French freaks out about that. But that is the way forward. That is the only thing we could do is using political power to crush our enemies. Right. Everything else is surrender.
Right. So next sentence. Unlike earlier conservatives who sought to reform the welfare system, how did that work for you? And deconstruct the administrative state, how did that work for you?
Yeah,
Gonzalez envisions seizing these. This is the thing. Like the conservative is addicted. Like the conservative movement is just absolutely addicted to doing the very things that have failed for 60 years.
Yeah.
Like that's like their MO.
It'll work this time.
They hate new ideas. That's what threatens them. They can't stand the idea that he's changing the pathway forward because you can't cash the checks on a new strategy here. That's the problem.
No, you can't. And like they're allergic to winning. They don't want winning. They would rather lose at a moderate pace, right? That's what they want. Paleoconservatism's unpopularity. That's the other thing. Like they care about popularity. Oh, they want to be.
They definitely care about popularity, but again, this argument has been completely smashed by Trump. Like none of this is relevant anymore. Trump proved them wrong. Trump proved that Buchanan is actually the more appealing. I bet if Buchanan ran right now, Buchanan would be. I mean, obviously he'd be so hated by the media he wouldn't ever get a voice. But his rhetoric, the time is ripe for Buchanan's approach to things. Absolutely, he was ahead of his time.
Let's read. Go ahead and read this section here.
The problem for paleoconservatives has always been that their ideas are wildly unpopular. It's wildly unpopular with the donor base for sure.
Yes.
Although Buchanan's 1992 run for president certainly damaged H.W. Bush's chances for re-election, he failed to win.
Not that.
I know. He failed to win a single state in the Republican primary. Despite what contributors to A Paleoconservative Anthology seem to believe, right-wing Marxism has no real mass appeal. But again, But again, the point of the right-wing vanguard is to communicate these intellectual ideas to the base. And that's what Trump did unwittingly. He didn't know what he was doing, but he did have mass appeal. Yeah. Trump, like right now, Ron DeSantis is polling significantly under Trump. Despite all of the things that they're doing to Trump, despite the fact that he's been indicted, despite the fact that he's experienced a media like smorgasbord of attacks, he's still more popular because the populace is ready for someone who is just seen as an enemy of the regime.
Yeah, there's an unshakable base of 20 to 30 million people that are not going away, right? That's what they hate. Like that's why they hate Trump. I mean, if he was just a billionaire, doing billionaire stuff in New York City or in Florida now, they wouldn't care about him at all. It's that he is this human shelling point that has assembled this base of support along these lines that they despise. And it's, yeah, he has to go back to 1992 to discuss these things because he's not going to talk about 2016 or 2020 where Donald Trump what is the most popular Republican in American history with 74 million votes. No, they don't want to discuss those things at all. Yeah, right. Paleoconservatism has no mass appeal. Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't. Yeah, for sure, buddy. That's why a paleoconservative television commentator who was recently fired was the most popular cable news pundit ever on a nightly basis. And now that he's doing his show on Twitter, it's getting tens of millions of views, which totally blows out anything else. And what's Tucker doing? He's communicating paleoconservative ideas on a nightly basis,
more or less.
And it has no mass appeal. Definitely has no mass appeal at all. You definitely have the pulse on American society, Michael Lucchese. You definitely get it, man. Like, what a clown. Failed Arizona Senate candidate Blake Masters, who, by the way, got outspent 10-1 and still almost won, was Sam Francis's most prominent booster in the last election. Much of his campaign's rhetoric about class warfare in opposition to the regime was obviously shaped by paleoconservative theory. At one point, Masters even recommended Francis's book, Beautiful Losers, to his social media followers. Arizona voters had little interest in paleoconservative ideology, however, and Masters lost to his Democratic opponent by hundreds of thousands of votes. It is doubtful voters, thanks to Mitch McConnell, by the way, who withheld every penny that he could have gotten and instead, devoted all the money to opponents of guys like Masters and in primaries rather than supporting them in the general election. It's definitely that Blake Masters was totally unpopular and people didn't like him. Arizona voters had little interest in paleoconservative ideology, however, and Masters lost to his Democratic opponent by hundreds of thousands of votes. It is doubtful voters elsewhere in the country are hungry for paleoconservatism either. The candidates who did best in 2020 were Main Street conservatives such as Brian Kemp and Jim Pellin. Politicians who won stayed away from the bizarre obsessions of the right-wing Marxists
and appealing to the donor base. Like that's what gets you to win. And this is exactly
Brian Kemp had money. That's how he won.
The other thing is he's citing the same too. He's citing the same establishment like favored candidates that have basically run our country into the ground over the last 30 years. Yeah. It's he's still articulating the same, he's still defending the same types of people that have completely undermined the American way, and that's his MO.
Yeah, give Blake Masters Brian Kemp's war chest from all the donor money, all the donor millions, and see how he does in the 2020 election. I mean, Arizona too is a total mess in terms of fortification, and it has been, it still is. That the person who won for governor is the one who counts all the votes. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's his example of it being unpopular. He doesn't talk about Trump. It's weird. The big T is not here anywhere. Voters know right-wing Marxists cannot break the fever of grievance politics. Indeed, they will only make it worse. You guys are really fixing things. By the way, their goals are not too different from the progressives' use of the vast administrative state. Both liberal leftists and right-wing Marxists seek to concentrate power in a vanguard elite. The only difference is the victim class the factions seek to use as a revolutionary base. Yeah, that's how politics is done in this way since the left opened Pandora's box of grievance politics. That's the only way forward. You're not going to do it otherwise. That's what these people refuse to understand. They totally refuse to understand that there is a base that needs to be fought for. There's a base where these ideas are not just, kind of popular, where people are like, I like that, it's okay, I'll vote for it, I guess. They're intensely popular among the base of the middle American radical that votes for Trump. Intensely popular. In a way that Mitt Romney could never hope to be.
It's actually amazing how popular they are in light of the fact that the education system, corporate America, the media, like all the major institutions that manage and control the narrative really push back against anything deviating from the liberal regime. It's actually what's impressive is how widespread these ideas are. That's the impressive thing.
Despite all of that, despite a multi-billion-dollar reality manufacturing machine, they still love this stuff. And it's because it comports with reality. Right? That's what it is. It comports with the way God made the world. And so that's why people love it. They love their country. They love their families. They love social order. They love political order. They love not having criminals running around getting away with literally getting away with murder. And like that, crazy that's popular, huh? So the conservative movement's forebears would have soundly rejected right-wing Marxism. William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan were stridently opposed to the progressive establishment.
No, they weren't.
Doubt that. Press X to doubt. But they did not believe that they needed to stoke a new class conflict. Well, one, it's not a class conflict at all. I mean, maybe in the book, that I haven't read it yet, but maybe in the book they talk about class a little bit. But ultimately, it's not a class. It's not around class. I mean, it goes back to what he said about Francis. It's that these people hate heritage America. They hate Americans. They hate them, whether they're rich white people, whether they're poor white people.
I actually do think there is a class conflict. I think that, like, if you read Christopher Caldwell's book, like, is he a right-wing Marxist?
Yeah.
I mean, his entire point is that the new American Constitution, right, the Civil Rights Act, civil rights regime, it basically created a bifurcated American class where one is favored by the regime and the administrative state and the other one is not. I mean, that's a type of exactly what Francis is talking about. Is Caldwell like a right-wing Marxist?
Of course not.
Yeah,
of course not. But they preferred Washington and the American Revolution to Lenin and the Russian Revolution. Listen, the circumstances of current American cultural, social, political situation is totally different than 1776. I mean, come on.
The other thing, too, is I bet Francis would be more likely to defend the Tsarist regime than these neoconservative guys.
Absolutely. He would.
They would defend, like, Tsarist Russia. They don't have this, pie in the sky, like these, rainbow glasses for liberal democracy.
No.
Like, they would defend the traditional order. That's what the Paleoconservatives would do. So,
I mean, that would be a question I would love to ask Michael Lucchese, is if you had to choose between the Tsar and the White Russian Army and the Bolsheviks, right? And those are your only two options, because those were the only two options for Russians in 1917. Which would you choose? Right? You're going to choose an authoritarian Tsar that executes people and is really brutal to his enemies, or Lenin, right? Which do you choose? And I think we could figure out who they would pick.
Well, these guys inherited their ideas from Trotsky anyway, so I think the answer is clear.
Yeah, it's hilarious because, like, they're acting like, bringing up the idea of the vanguard is so bad. I mean, even like you go back to you can use this analysis on the history of the American Revolution, and what was that? What was the Constitutional Congress, or rather the Continental Congress? That was a vanguard of an elite that led.
It's true.
The people against the British Crown. That was Vanguardism, right? That's what it was. So it's like, what world are these people living in understanding how politics actually works, how it occurs in history? It is so. You could finish it off with the last paragraph here. Go ahead,
Yeah, let's
CJ.
see. Right-wing Marxism is an ideology of despair. Far from saving a republic they claim is already dead. These ideologues would simply inflame the partisan tensions which endanger it. This idea that like the American constitutional order is something that can still be defended is completely like it's so historic about what's already happened in the last 50 years. I don't take it very seriously anymore. I mean, these
No.
guys live in this perpetual Burkeanism world where we can still defend the traditional order. You know, like
Yeah.
it's insane. Like every institution, every corporation, every media group, every education center, even every mainline church is an outlet or a satellite for the overall leftist revolution.
Yeah.
And somehow we're bad because we claim it's dead. Like
Yeah.
it's silly.
It
There's little.
simply does not exist anymore. How can they not see it?
Yeah. There's little in A Paleoconservative Anthology with the enduring qualities of movement conservatism, the same thing that has basically sold us out to every agenda of the left for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So now that we have Caitlyn Jenner on Fox News, it's like that's the enduring quality of movement conservatism.
The enduring quality of movement conservatism, defending the right of gay men to get married. Right? Yeah. That's the enduring quality of movement conservatism.
Right.
Give me a break. That's I mean, oh man, these people like this is such trash what these people think. And it isn't even, I mean, it's obviously, you know, we have our you know, ideological beliefs and so forth and things that we, you know, that we understand and we recognize that drive this. We have our biases. But I mean, just from an objective standpoint, so much of this is just pure fantasy in this. Like they don't, they live in this world that, in this they have this whole history that simply did not happen at all in this way. I mean, they're so intellectually bankrupt.
Yeah.
It is astounding how you could be one of these people in current year in 2023. Right, how you can look at the political scene, the cultural scene, the social scene, and think that this still is operable, that this still works, that this is the way forward. I mean, and so I'm persuaded people like this, they're never going to get it.
Well, let me just read a comment from one of the other contributors who said this in an email. I'm not going to say who it is. It's not Paul, though. But one of the other contributors, you know, he said it in an email, so I don't know if he wants his name. But he said, we need to get some kind of law passed to keep young people from writing about the history of ideas. If you've only been here a quarter of a century, there's no way you've had enough time to read as much as you need to read to say anything that isn't bland, foolish, or both on the topic. And then he said, I enjoyed the quasi-religious incantation of the term right-wing Marxists in every other sentence, as though if he repeats it enough, the boogeyman can't be hiding under his bed. Then he said, you can safely bet your entire savings that he hasn't read any Marx, and he didn't read more than 10 pages of the book he's reviewing. So
yeah,
that's his comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear the guy looked for, you know, you go to the index, look for Sam Francis, what page is he on, and that's it. You know, he has zero intellectual curiosity. That's the thing that really typifies these people. Is they're not curious about it. They're not curious about, I mean, and you see this all the time in academia, or even, you know, I see it all the time in the church, in, you know, academic writing and things like this. Is there's no desire whatsoever to even understand what your opponent thinks.
Yeah.
Right. And you can see that because he's not stating these things in a way that anyone in this anthology would recognize as their own views. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so preposterous to call them right-wing Marxists because you believe in Vanguardism as an effective means of political organizing. That's Marxism. Come on. What? Like, it's, I mean, this is a young guy who's beyond his depth and is simply a propagandist. Mm-hmm. Right. He's pushing this line because, you know, the big donors with lots of bucks, they like it. They like this stuff, and it justifies the waste of millions and millions of dollars on garbage like law and liberty, or, you know, or all the various, you know, conservative think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute, or all of that. Like it justifies all of their failures. Mm-hmm. Right? No, it's not happening. These guys aren't popular. These ideas don't work. Let's just keep trotting out Mitt Romneys all the time and Tim Scotts. That's what we need, right? That is what wins. That's how we get back to the real America, real conservatism. It's really sad ultimately, I think, because you know we just have to step over these people. We're not going to take these institutions. We're not going to we're not going to be able to overcome them in the sense that someday guys like us will be in charge of movement conservatism. That ship has sailed and it's going to die. I mean, when all of their boomer donors pass on, right, the jig will be up. And it's already begun to happen, I think. And so like what's going to continue to happen is the online right wing and this vanguard of thinkers is going to continue to push ideas that make sense to regular people.
Yeah.
Right? Ideas that make sense to regular people, and cut through the billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of propaganda that's pushed on them constantly. Because we have, I mean, it's like, North Korea has all of these humiliation rituals, right, that they make their people do. They make them believe just preposterous propaganda because that smokes out dissidents. And we have a similar operation with the propaganda of the United States. But the problem is, at least up till now, is there isn't major persecution until really 2021 of right wing dissidents. And so it's very easy for these ideas to spread and be disseminated. There are the internet, even with all of the controls that they've put on everything, and even with Twitter still banning people and everything else, ideas are able to get out there. This is why I'm so, if I could shill for Gab for a second, like why I'm so bullish on things like Gab is because you can share ideas that are not allowed and they make sense to regular people, despite everything they see that they're told, all of the education that they've had about so-called American history. It's incredibly popular, actually, to be able to tell the truth about American history and say, like, we have a beautiful, glorious heritage that we can be proud of. And that is, that's something, like, even growing up, like, it was kind of quaint and almost, where you got to celebrate the Pilgrims and you got to celebrate Columbus and you got to celebrate this, the American independence and so forth. And now those things are totally demonized in the education system. But people still yearn for this. They still want this. They still want to be able to tell the truth, right? People are desperate for the truth when they're surrounded by lies. And so these ideas are going to continue to become more and more popular. And guys like Michael Lucchese are going to, freak out about it more and more and more. And there's nothing they can do about it, right? Paul Gottfried is becoming more and more popular in his 80s than he ever has been in his entire life, I would imagine. And that is wonderful. That is fantastic. And I hope and pray for continued long life for him so he can enjoy this popularity. He can enjoy the popularity of paleoconservatism as it continues to grow and as new institutions are formed. That is what I look for and what I'm excited about. I mean, things like this actually, yeah, they're sad and they can maybe bum you out, but it's like the last gasp of a dying animal. They know it's over, right? They know it's over. They know that we are going to win and not them. And that's what I see. Like, you want to talk about desperation. That's what movement conservative, like this signals the desperation of movement conservatism.
I also don't mind, like, the idea that we should, I think despair is a sin, but the idea that we should never, like, that there's no context in the development of world history where we can't be somber about what's happening and sober about what's happening. You can make fun of people for, like, losing everything and call it despair, But like, if you look at what happened to the German nation, like in the 20th century, they lost their world, and like learning to cope with that is something that I don't like. This like I have a thing for like lost causes. Like I don't have this like Whiggish view of like progressive history where everything gets better every year and like we're always advancing. Like I do feel bad for people who have lost their world. I think the Russians lost their world with the Bolsheviks. I think the Germans lost their world in the course of like the 20th century revolutions. I think that the South lost their world in the Civil War. And I can't imagine like calling myself a conservative and just mocking all of these people and saying, oh, they're just despairing. Like these rural Americans in flyover country that have been completely subsumed by the elites on both the coasts, just mocking them for having despair is really like a Washington, D.C. thing to do. Like if you look at this guy's bio in his piece, he's like a communications director at some think tank in Washington, D.C. Like, that's very consistent with your like mocking the rural Americans for losing their world. Like, that's exactly.
It takes me back to, I've mentioned this, I think, on our show before, when I, made this very clear conscious break from libertarianism was when I read the National Review piece by Kevin Williamson that said the white working class deserves to die.
Yeah.
Like I was like, whoa, these people hate me. They hate my people. They hate where I'm from. They hate us. Yeah. It isn't just like, oh, they're embarrassed by us. Like they hate us. They want us dead. And that's what this drips with is these people, they're
just despairing, like,
they're disgusting rubes, the peasants. We don't want those people. No. And I think, as a vanguard goes forth and spreads ideas and organizes, our people in America to fight all of the insanity, what is going to occur is that there will be a new elite that forms, and it won't include guys like this. And thank God. It won't. I mean, I'm the optimist on the show here. And I think that there's great potential for the future here. There's great potential for what comes next. And there, like you said, there are circumstances where sometimes it is over. It's just done. But I think here where we are in America in particular, there are tens of millions of people who are not going to give up and not going to just surrender our nation. And it's taken things getting really bad for them to be awoken, but it's happening, and I think we're going to win.
Yep. We can't stand athwart fire yelling stop.
We cannot.
We're going to fight fire with fire. We're not going to be ashamed with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, wrapping up here, what have you done this week? Are you going to write a review of this and make fun of this in writing, or what are you going to do?
I don't know. I've been so busy. I don't know if I will write a review. This is a pretty thorough discussion of the piece.
Yeah, we took them down.
We did. But yeah, I've continued the podcast with Chronicles. We talked to Doug Wilson last week. So that released earlier. And then by the time this comes out, I'll probably be publishing a conversation that I just had with Professor Stanley Payne on the Spanish Civil War and General Franco, which was a really interesting conversation. Unfortunately, Paul was involved, but he got cut out halfway through. So I was about to ask him what he thought of Franco. So maybe I'll have to re-record something and then like stick it in there. But anyways, it was a good conversation. So that's what I've been up to.
Oh, excellent. Well, for me, it's I've got more articles coming for news.gab.com, and so stay tuned for that. And the book is happening. We still don't have the date set yet because some of that is contingent on Amazon and how quickly we can get everything formatted and ready to go. But it's going to happen this summer, and it's going to be awesome. And I'm going to shill that thing like crazy. And I'm excited for it. It's been a long project in the making. And it really will be a handbook for aggressive right-wing Christianity to encourage our people if you want 250 pages, or I don't know how long it's going to be once we copy edit it, of 250 pages or so of encouragement that we're going to win. That's going to be it. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, you all will be the first to know when it's going to be coming out. We'll let you know about that. But otherwise, yeah, we've gone, almost an hour and a half here. And so what looks like we're going to make it is trying to join the chat here, but I'm not going to let him in. Sorry, we're all going to make it. Maybe next time he'll get to join us. But otherwise, for all of us here, for CJ and me, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and share this conversation of us making fun of neoconservatives and movement conservative losers. And if you didn't like it, well, share it anyway. Otherwise, we wish you all a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.